Okay, good morning everyone. Something slightly different with this session. So, as part of the football collective series we've been doing, we've been getting people together to allow them to talk about key research issues, but also connect and stay in touch with each other, build new relationships, and maintain existing relationships in a different way, and just keeping that support for each other. Slightly different today. This morning, we're going to talk just myself and my colleague, Dr. Tom Webb, who's joined us from Portsmouth. We're going to talk about a recent commentary I've published in Managing Sport and Leisure. So Managing Sport and Leisure is a journal I'm co-editor of with Dr. Rob Wilson, and we took over earlier this year as custodian of the journal. And one of the aspects we're trying to promote is research commentaries, and a commentary gives authors and the academic community the opportunity to present well-argued, shorter communications that are able to shed new light on a research area. And it might be consolidating what we know and offering directions for where it needs to go. It might be offering practitioner insights. It might offer management insights. But ultimately, it's about saying, this is what we know about an area, and this is the opportunities that we have to move forward with it. And I was delighted when Tom submitted a commentary. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. To introduce Tom, Tom's a senior lecturer at the University of Portsmouth. Those that know him will know that his research areas is in referees and officials. But this doesn't just cover one aspect. He's come at this probably over the past 10 or 15 years from a number of different levels, from leadership, management, through to the operational environment and work in practice. And I guess this then starts to begin to move into this narrative of abuse that Tom is beginning to research on. His two latest, well, it's one of the first books that he put out, which was a monograph with outreach, was on elite referees officiating in the Premier League, La Liga, and Serie A. And the most recent one that is Impress, not under review, Impress, is on referees, match officials, and abuse, innovations for policy. So Tom's really focused in on this area over the past decade or more. People will know him for that. So I'm really delighted that to have someone who's such an expert in that particular area make this contribution. To kick us off, Tom. First off, welcome. I'm in Birkenhead. I'm in the garden, and that's not because it's really nice, but it is. But it's just to stay out the way of the kids. Where are you now? Are you okay?
Yeah. So I live about half an hour from Portsmouth, out into the countryside a little bit. So we're sort of a bit out of the main city, and I've tried to shut myself in. I'm in the dining room. So I tend to move around the house at the moment. So at the moment I'm in the dining room. As the day goes on, I've got like the spare room, which I've sort of set up. But the problem with that is it's next to one of the kids' bedrooms, and one of them. So I didn't want to go in there. So I sort of move around a little bit. But yeah, everything's okay, as good as it can be at the moment, I guess.
Brilliant. I feel like you spend the day dodging a line of fire, but the kids occupy different parts of the house at different parts of the day, depending on how they're feeling. But I'm sure they'll be out at some point to grab a bike or try and play footy. So I'll just, if you see me nodding, to tell them to get back in or stay out the way, or I'll just let them go for it.
Yeah.
Just to kick us off then, Tom, what was maybe just give a background to why you decided to put this commentary in, and what made you think, right, this is needed at this point?
Yeah, well, to be honest, the commentary's come about, I've been thinking about it for a while, and the opportunity presented itself through, Managing Sport and Leisure and my involvement with the journal. And really it's to sort of take stock of where we're at in terms of the research, and then look at where we need to go. So the work you touched on, Dan, that I've done over the last sort of 10, 15 years has been from a variety of perspectives, different theoretical backgrounds, with the two books a good example. So one looking at elite referees in football across different countries and the cultures and practices that exist therein, and how they operate, how they're managed, led, all that sort of stuff at the top end of the game. And then The second book, which is due the publishers in the next 3 weeks, I think it is. Better make sure of that date, otherwise it's going to be late. But that one's looking at the abuse of match officials more specifically, and then the implications for policy and future directions. So looking at, you know, why that happens across different sports, across England in particular to start with in that book, and then it starts to look at some of the work we've done in France and the Netherlands in football, and also then expand to other countries and what's happening in other countries in terms of the abuse of match officials, the support that exists, the environment that they operate within, and all of that sort of stuff. So that book looks at elite level all the way down to someone who operates on a Sunday in a local park, you know, with grassroots level football, for example. So the two books are going to be very different, and I guess that sort of gives a good almost overview of the different areas of research that I've been involved with. So the commentary really gave it an opportunity to pull some of that together, to start to look at not just what I'd done really, which was quite useful from a personal perspective, to look at, okay, what have I done, but what else do I need to do, or where do we need to go, and look at, you know, what those gaps in the literature might be, and then moving forward, what I think in terms of scholarship would be really useful to develop not just the research, but also the wider game, if you like, the different sports, what's going to help position us a little bit more robustly in terms of those sports moving forward, something which, you know, at the present time is really, really important to consider. So I think it's really timely to sort of look at some of this stuff.
Can I ask Tom, so I mean, I'm conscious that there's a broad spectrum of people that check out and then are associated with the Football Collective in different respects. And I also remember it must have been about 2005, one of my professors had gone on a sabbatical, and he was a physiologist by trade, but he'd gone and spent time with referees. And I've checked out on his reflective diary, and it was fascinating to see a bit of an insight and read lots of unknown stuff at the elite side. But, you know, if you look at, say, my career is a mess. So it goes all different sporting directors, physical activity and health, leadership management, bit of HR and CSR, and I've done loads of case stuff. But you've maintained this focus right the way through. And until you talk about abuse, people will be thinking, what are we researching, and why this is so important to research referees at a grassroots level and at an elite level. So maybe what drew you to that in the first place? And why is it so important that we get this right and we understand it more?
Yeah. Well, I think the honest answer to that was it started when I was doing my master's degree at the University of Gloucestershire, and it started by accident. So I used to play at a reasonable level. I was never one of those people that particularly shouted at referees or anything in football, but so I sort of understood, I guess, a little bit, with probably subconsciously, the challenges they faced in their jobs, but I'd never considered doing any research in that area. And it just so happened that my course leader said, look, I've got a meeting with the FA. Do you want to come along? It's a potential dissertation and, you know, some funding associated. So I thought, well, you know, as a master's student, that'd be a bit stupid not to do that and make some contacts and that sort of thing. So I went along. I had no idea what the project was about, and it turned out it was about referees. And it was in 2003, 2004, and it was before they set up the Respect Programme, which was in 2008, and they were looking at why they were losing referees and why they were struggling to retain them. And what they wanted us to do was survey these match officials that they had on a database and look at positives, negatives, and that was then designed to contribute to something which later became known as the Respect Programme, is a sort of underlying base of evidence, if you like, to formulate that programme. So that was where it started, which was really by accident. I sort of fell into it, I guess, but I found it really interesting. So from that point, I then went and worked in the sector. I worked in sports management for a few years, but always wanted to come back to academia, and when I came back, I obviously maintained those contacts, and I got back in touch with them, and that was where my PhD came from, which was about elite referees in football, looking at how they train, operate across different countries at UEFA and FIFA, and some of the challenges that exist.
Can I ask, Tom, when you started that research, I mean, was it the first time some of the referees had come across researchers, or was it quite common for them, or was it really like new territory? And how was your welcome in that first phase? Was it like, oh, great, finally someone's interested in us, or was it like, who's this guy? Is he here to help us, or is he here to work
Yeah,
out
it's a bit of
what
both, really.
obstacles are?
Yeah, a bit of both. They were quite sceptical, some of them initially, so we had to go and speak to referees associations and things like that to try and get buy-in to the online survey, because obviously back in 2003, 2004, online surveys weren't particularly prevalent. You didn't use them that much. So, and actually the analysis tools at the time were quite cumbersome, so it's much more difficult and time-consuming to do. So getting that buy-in was really important. There had been some research prior to that point, but not on a mass scale. So we had I think we ended up with over about, I think it's 3,000 responses, something like that, which was really big at that time and quite powerful sort of, number. Other research around that time was really mostly qualitative, but very sparse from a UK perspective. If we were looking at sort of the US, things like that, mostly psychological, stress related, looking at stresses and impact on performance and that sort of thing. So there were huge gaps in the literature, massive gaps in the literature in our understanding, which is another reason that I became more and more interested, because I started looking at it and thinking, well, there's not a lot of information here. And I obviously understood from a football perspective, given the work that we'd done as part of the Masters, that there were major issues in terms of the recruitment and retention of some of these referees and what impact that might have on the game if it continued. And then I started becoming interested on the history behind it. So, why is it like it is now? Why have we got this culture of abuse? Where does that come from? What about the training? How are referees trained, and how have they been trained historically, and how does that compare to players, and all that sort of stuff started getting my attention, really. So I sort of looked from a variety of perspectives, so historical publications, psychological publications, leadership, management, lots of different perspectives. And that was really just from that one particular project that I did as part of my Masters that it sort of evolved from that, I guess.
And do you think looking back on that, Tom, and I guess the commentary alludes into some of this, obviously you will have filled many of those gaps, but there's not a big abundance of people doing this kind of research. Do you think there's still more? Do you think there's still a lot more work to do from a management, leadership, and sociological perspective beyond just the physiological and psychological stresses type stuff that have been examined earlier?
Yeah, I think the leadership, management, sociological aspects are the disciplines that really need to be examined much more. There's gaps. There's gaps in psychological and physiological research with referees or match officials, but it's more prevalent, that type of research. When we're looking from a management, leadership, sociological, social science perspective, there are huge areas of research that need attention, really. So, in the commentary I talk about, we've looked at abuse, for example, but we've looked at physical and verbal abuse. We haven't looked at online abuse as much. And there's work on, online abuse or abuse through social media and different platforms in different areas of sport, but not really related to match officials at all. So, to me, that's a really big area that needs, some attention from scholars, really, because that's a growing area, and certainly on a from a local perspective, we've all played local sport, whether that's football, rugby, cricket, things like that. You tend to know the referee or the match official. They might officiate you a number of times a season. You might actually know sort of where they live. You might live in the same town as them. So if abuse is happening towards those individuals on that sort of localized level, that's a real problem, particularly if people know where they live, or there's a social media, perspective to that, it's something that needs a lot more attention. Likewise, sort of mental health, well-being related research, again, that links into abuse as well, consequences of abuse potentially on the individual. And again, there's really not very much on that at all, but bar a couple of studies, one of which I think was a sort of meta-analysis or an integrative review. So there's significant areas of development that are required. Gender studies as well. There's not as much work on female match officials, for example.
Interesting, Tom. You talk about the one of the big things, I guess, that really perks everyone's attention is that if we don't have referees, we don't have a game, especially at a grassroots level. But do you think the way, I'm thinking of the things that you found from your research, do you think the experience that grassroots referees have had has hampered the development of referees? In that, I could be a really old school referee that has not gone through all the recent training, but I just keep putting up with it. Where you might be a new referee coming through, you're keen to learn, you've got loads of development opportunities ahead of you, but you get having a bad experience, so you turn away, and then the rest of the team's boys and girls are left with me. So you're almost like you reduce the pool and keep some of like the existing, don't want to say poor practice, but existing working practice that people aren't happy with, and the new referees come in, they don't have a great experience, so they're turned away. Is there anything towards that?
Yeah, there's that's a real problem. So one of the issues is with new referees in football, for example, FA tend to recruit around 6,000-7,000 a year on average, varies year to year, but they tend to lose that number as well. So the number's not really going up, it's quite static. And also, of those that they recruit, most tend to leave within the first 2 years. So if they're going to leave, that first 2 years is really, really crucial. So abuse is part of the problem. It's not the only problem, but it is a significant issue when you look at the research and the work that's been done. But there are other problems like support. You sort of talked around that a bit, Dan, but support networks are really important, whether they're formal or informal. And we talk about that quite a lot in the new book. About the importance of supporting those individuals, particularly those young, new referees or match officials, because they're the most vulnerable. Quite often they're young or they're kids. They might be 14, 15. So we've got a duty of care there as well to those individuals. And if you're right, if they get a bad experience, the likelihood is that they're not going to come back. Now, that's really, really important, because otherwise what happens is the workforce becomes more and more aged. We have less people that are young that are coming through those systems, those development pathways. And that has impacts at every level of the game, right up to the Premier League with the select group. Because if you haven't got a big enough talent pool, it's much more difficult to train referees or to get referees that are at the sufficient level to be able to officiate in the professional leagues or the Premier League. So then the standard gets criticised because it's not good enough at the top level. But ultimately, it comes down to what happens at that grassroots level at a starting point, because every referee has to come in at that level and work their way up. So if we don't have those support networks, if we don't have the systems in place, then the development pathways just don't work. And we all know about, talent ID and development in terms of the sort of pyramid system. The bigger the base, the more you have at the different levels and the easier it is to get people through those systems. So if you reduce the base, it just becomes that much more difficult to have referees progressing through that system.
It's really interesting when you mention abuse. I think the best thing that can happen in abuse is that they just walk away. I think the worst thing is that it materializes into something that is potentially worse and more harmful. So that's both at the grassroots and at the elite level of the game. So the elite level of the game, I've seen a lot of reports around referees needing protection, security, and police protection between games and stuff like this. So undoubtedly, what we see at certain not just Premier League but elite levels, often those behaviours transfer down into community grassroots levels. So undoubtedly, I'm sure there's a lot of referees that feel like at a grassroots level they could do with some protection and maybe a support group doesn't offer that, but it does offer some kind of support and network through it. So if I spin it slightly, Tom, when you haven't researched referees for 10 or 15 years, you must have been thinking, well, this has been fantastic, and then they go and throw VAR into the mix. What was that? Was that if they just made football refereeing sexy, or if they just threw a big can of worms into your research and you're like, right, what do we do now? And so how has that impacted your thinking, and what was your initial thoughts when you seen all this materialise?
Yeah, well, VAR has been fascinating to watch over the season to date, whatever happens from now on. But the impact on the game, behaviour of players, coaches, referees has been really interesting to watch. I wrote a piece right at the start of the year for The Conversation. Got asked to do one. It's just looking at how technology changes sport, basically, with VAR as a sort of central piece. And that was after 2 or 3 really contentious incidents involving handballs at the start of the season, and how handball was being looked at slightly differently for attackers compared to defenders and things like that. And then the experiences of people within the stadium, and alongside that, the experiences of referees using the technology. And it is changing the game. Now, everyone has sort of different opinions on it. It's been sort of nice to, in a way, for the sort of debate to die down a little bit over the last few weeks, because I got asked quite a lot in terms of media stuff and things like that about, how referees are dealing with it, whether they like it, whether it's helping them, whether it's hindering them. And I think it's a mix. I think it's really interesting when you look at the Premier League, in that the way we're using VAR is very different to other leagues at the moment. We're not really using, or referees have been instructed to not use the pitch side monitors if they possibly can. And there were reasons for that at the start of the year when they put VAR into practice. And the thoughts were about maintaining the flow of the game, not disrupting it, because that's a really big thing with the Premier League. It's one of the unique selling points in terms of TV rights and things like that. When the Premier League sell these rights overseas, it's the fact that the league is fast paced, it's at high action, there's things happening all the time, and they were really worried that VAR was going to impact upon that. And what's happened is it has impacted upon it, and actually using the pitch side monitors is probably more effective than the system that's being used in the Premier League at the moment. In fact, other leagues have been able to use those pitch side monitors, as of FIFA, in World Cups, men's and women's World Cups. And there were issues, but the Premier League going their own way has created other tensions and problems with the technology, I think. It's taking a long time for decisions to be, decided upon at Stockley Park and then come back to the referee. It's presented questions about the role and authority of the on-field referee as well, which I think isn't a good thing. I think you need that, that individual, that on-field referee, the fourth official, the assistants that are at the game are there to uphold the laws of the game. That's their job. That's what they're there to do. And then they're sort of there to oversee that. And if you start eroding that level of responsibility, if you like, then I think you start to have problems in terms of what those people on the field are there to do and what they're responsible for, and their decision-making processes become a bit clouded. And I think that's where players have struggled and coaches have struggled, managers, with, they just don't understand the processes, the protocols behind some of the decisions that are made. And that's, if you look at the comments, generally, it's about, I don't understand why that decision's been given. I don't understand how we've arrived at that decision. And I think that's a problem. When you start to get a lack of clarity, then questions are asked in terms of the authenticity of the process.
I think that's really interesting. In terms of how we manage change behaviours, and a key part of that would be making sure we communicate the changes, make sure everyone is aware and understands them. Now, obviously, we're talking about football stakeholders and that massive group of people that is very diverse, and trying to make something that is easily understandable is really challenging. But I guess more work needs to go into that. And in this downtime, I think there's a real opportunity to fill it with explainers and understanding. Although some people will say, like yourself, we've had enough of VAR for a little bit. There's actually real opportunities to, and this is not just in all that, this is all aspects of football, to do the work that needs to be done that hasn't been done. And if it is raising understanding, raising awareness, then this is the time that we need to be doing that type of work. But no, fascinating, Tom. I think linking in with the commentary, one of the key aspects of that is trying to set the agenda for what's coming forward. So taking all that insight and nous that you've got from all your research and putting it on paper to say and to share, where do we need to go with this? And part of anything that we've done with the football collective, we've also tried to do that too. So almost help, whether it's the next master's students or early career researcher picking up this and listening to this, if we can actually, Tom's given me some real clear direction here of what the next piece of research might look like. So in terms of that part, where are the opportunities that you see in this research coming up over the next few years or presently?
I think we're looking at football in particular. I think VAR, the implication and impact of VAR, like you mentioned, Dan, is we talked about, is a big area of interest. I think you could look at how we mentioned about changing behaviours. I mean, obviously that takes a little bit of time to measure and to consider when you're looking at players and coaches and things like that over time. But there's definite potential there. I think in terms of match officials more widely, I think we're looking at things like, the mental health and well-being side of things. Now, again, that's considered in different areas of sport. It's not really considered in terms of match officials and the challenges and barriers they face to enjoyment, effective operations, to just doing their job that they want to do every weekend. For the vast majority of them, all they want to do is go out and enjoy it. That's why they do it. If you lose that enjoyment, it's the same as anything, then they'll stop. So we need to understand the challenges they face, and abuse is one of those. So consequences of abuse. We know a bit about abuse, why it occurs, how it occurs, the settings for abuse. What we don't know so much about is the impact on the individual, on larger groups, on their well-being and mental health. So I think that's something that needs consideration. I think we need to step outside looking at, male orientated studies all the time as well. There's a lot of those. Female football. I was on the session the other day on female football at the moment, women's sport in as part of the football collective, and it was really interesting to see some of the conversations there. And if we take that to female referees, there are different challenges that some of those female referees face, and there's not really that much research on those sort of differences and the development of the game from a match official perspective. It's the same. The game is growing. The female game is growing, but we don't really understand the female match officials that are operational, the challenges they face, that sort of stuff. So again, there's gaps there. And also, from a BAME perspective, there's very little research from, looking at different marginalized groups. There's more that could be done there. I know that there's a study being developed in America at the moment on that subject. But again, from a European perspective, very little. And again, I think that needs addressing. And then also online abuse. Again, we know about abuse more widely, but we don't really know much about online abuse, which again, is more and more prevalent, and abuse from a different perspective. So we know a little about, perspective of the referee, the match official. What about players and coaches? Why do they do it? What are the triggers? How can we move towards a more harmonious working relationship, if you like? Some of the work we've done has looked at the groupings within sport, and referees being an out group, if you like, because they have different objectives, whereas players, coaches, spectators often have shared objectives. Referees have very different objectives to enjoyment during a game than players and coaches. The referees don't care which team wins. What they're there to do is uphold the laws of the game. So those objectives are very different to the players, the coaches, and the spectators. And I think a bit more understanding around the behaviour of players, coaches, and spectators towards officials would help. Try and mitigate some of those issues that exist in those relationships, which have existed for centuries. It's not a new thing. But we need to try and look at how we work and how we can deal with some of those problems, because we've got fewer and fewer officials, which means, you know, less matches that are officiated, which means more and more problems over the years in terms of recruitment and retention, whatever sport we're looking at. But football is a particular concern. So I think those areas are areas I think, you know, really need some further attention, and there are gaps there that researchers can really tap into.
Can I just add in one final question, Thomas? What do you think the consequence of us having this extended coronavirus isolation break away from football will mean for grassroots referees?
I think one of the concerns is, and we've talked about some of the issues they face. There's two major things, I think. When things start up, however they start up again, the FA are going to have a challenge getting those courses filled, those for new referees. I think that's going to be a problem, because I think there's, you know, we haven't got people just sat there waiting to do those courses. There's not extensive waiting lists. There are waiting lists, but it's, you know, I think that might be a concern, you know, because if we're losing people, and that, you know, then recruiting them becomes more and more difficult and more important. And that leads me to the second point, whether those people that are experiencing problems now, after however many weeks of a lack of football, then think, well, actually, I haven't missed it. Why am I going to give up my time for people to shout at me? Because, you know, I wasn't enjoying it, and these last however many weeks have shown me that I can do without it.
Yeah.
That might be a real concern, that we start to lose those people, and they think, you know, actually, I didn't have much support when I was a referee. Well, now, you know, I've stopped doing it, and actually my life is okay. I don't need it. I don't miss it. And if we're not recruiting people as well, we might see numbers drop, and that's a concern, because we've already got matches that take place in football and in other sports that don't have match officials, they don't have referees every weekend, and we really can't do with more of those fixtures, because it just becomes more and more of a problem, particularly as kids get older. You know, at lower levels, when it's, you know, youth football, young kids, parents can be referees, that's okay. But as soon as it becomes competitive, you need a referee, and if we haven't got them, those fixtures can't take place if you haven't got a qualified official. So that becomes more of a problem, and that is a worry, I think. Certainly, if we look at the research we've done and look at the current situation, I think that could be a concern.
Okay, very interesting, and I think about that from a research perspective, but also from someone who's heavily involved in grassroots football. So, Tom, thank you so much for this, and I feel like we've got like a bit of a personal insight into like the research there, but also about the research as well, about the commentary, and about the, you know, what has been done so far, but also the opportunities. Really delighted that you chose to submit with Managing Sport and Leisure, and delighted you're involved in the journal, and that you've been a massive support for the football collective over the years as well. So yeah, that's it from us. So Tom Webb from the University of Portsmouth, and I'm Dan Parnell from the University of Liverpool. So thanks very much, Tom. Appreciate it.
No worries. Cheers, Dan.